So I figured it was time we should start to put all these quick tips into practice and actually build some things. So this will be a separate playlist on the channel called Let's Build, and we'll just make stuff. This first one's going to be real simple. You'll see what it is when we get to the actual video part of this. It's it's like a little mini manhole that goes over like a water access thing or whatever. I just saw it today walking the dog and thought, good, I'll take a picture of that and we'll start there. The purpose here is going to be for you to see my workflow, and to get a feel for the rough steps that I go through when I create a prop. So we don't have to go over and over to hit the same territory each time I build something on the channel. So my hope is that we start here, something simple, and we build up into something more complex over time. We get larger and larger, more complex props, and we tackle more and more challenging problems. But to get started, this seemed like a good place. I recorded most of the steps for this, and I'm just going to narrate over the top of it and talk about the app that I'm using, the concepts behind the reasons why I'm doing the things I'm doing, and you should have you should have a pretty good feel for how I do things once we get to the end of this. So I hope you enjoy it, and check it out. So like I said, this is something that I found on my walk this morning when walking Wendell. It's just a little cover that was in the side of the sidewalk. So I'm going to build this out in Fusion 360 just because there's lots of bevels and things that need to happen in here, and it seems like a better choice. Just to speed this first thing along. So first thing is we build the outer ring. And typically this is good advice from when you're doing high poly meshes that are comprised of multiple things. If there are multiple pieces in the real world, they should be multiple pieces on your high poly mesh. That's just a good rule of thumb that I found works well. So you can see here, now we're going to work on this inner shape. And this will be, we'll start off with a circle. And then we need to cut out those side notches. And you'll see how in Fusion, when you're overlaying, like when you're doing your sketches and you're overlaying drawings on top of other drawings, Fusion is constantly doing a slice and dice routine. Everywhere that lines cross, it's generating those intersections. So you see when I drop down this circle, I can then grab the trim tool and take away the parts that I don't want anymore. Now I'm kind of screwing this up and I'm going to have to zoom back in and fix it here in a second, but that is the concept. You can see here, watch, I'll go into trim and knock out those pieces and do the same on the other side. So now we just have the exact shape in the center that we want. So we'll hop out of the sketch and grab that piece and extrude that up. I think I extruded up about halfway because we want everything else on top of that surface to be built higher, right? So that gives it room to grow. And also that's kind of thinking ahead to the low poly mesh as well, because I know that I don't want this thing to have any big change to the silhouette. So I want the top of the low poly to be one simple polygon, or it's a collection of polygons obviously, but I want it to be flat is what I'm saying. So thinking ahead to that, while I'm building the high poly, I'm trying to respect that desire. Okay, so now I want to draw a bunch of concentric circles. I'm just going to pause the video here for a second. Hold on, there we go. I want to draw a bunch of concentric circles that go within the outside, because you've got all of these shapes here. There's a circle here, circle here, circle here. But to do that, I've got to know where this exact middle is. So in Fusion, I'm going to use the construct menu to create a point by clicking this circle, now it created this point for me. That's the exact center of that outside circle. And I can use that as the base point to draw my other circles inside. And then I know that they're all rooted correctly. Now you'll see while I'm doing this, this photograph was taken quickly. Like I was just walking the dog and I saw it and I snapped the picture. So I don't have the correct perspective. It's a little bit skewed and that kind of stuff. But, you know, in terms of real life, this is kind of what you end up with when you get concept arts or reference pictures and stuff. It's like sometimes stuff is not exactly the way you want it to be. So you just have to approximate and, you know, work with what you got. And get close enough, basically. Getting close enough is really the goal a lot of times. So you'll see me kind of moving through here, and I make some mistakes and have to back out and have to restart the process and things, but this is just a matter of getting comfortable with Fusion. See, I just didn't go far enough, so I'll hit the extend tool and knock them all the way out to the outer edge of the circle to make sure I've got the shape I need, and take those out. Okay, so now I've got those side pieces built up. Yeah, now I tried to trim that, but this is something that's actually very useful, and we might get into this in a future video. But this project menu over here, what that's doing is I can say, hey, I want you to project some geometry from another sketch or another body and put it into this sketch. Now it's not copying it in here, but it's putting it in here as a reference sort of thing. So I can click on it and use it you know, as if it was part of the sketch. So I've projected that original cutout that I did into this new sketch. So using that, I can then trim against that former shape, you know, and get the outside edge that I want. And so I undo back and I have to reproject and all that stuff. You know, I'm not the greatest Fusion user in the world, but I get the job done. Okay, what are we doing? Okay. Now, admittedly, there's probably an easier way of doing this, but this was what I came up with just for knocking out these little, you know, pieces that were going to stick out. I'm like, well, I'll just draw the lines, whatever, you know. And I believe this goes on for a little bit, so I'm just going to fast forward a little and get us through this part. Just, you know, we'll go 2x on this. But this is really leveraging that power I was talking about, where Fusion, you can draw lines and circles and such all day long, you know, and they're overlapping, and Fusion knows where they intersect, and it's being smart about it. You know, Fusion is, yeah, some weirdness there. Sometimes there's weirdness. That should be kind of the slogan for Fusion. Sometimes there's weirdness. But you can leverage that intersection code, obviously, to keep drawing out, you know, lines between edges. And when I get to the end of this, you'll see that I do a big trim job, knock out all the pieces that I need to knock out, and end up with just the shapes that I want to be left with. Now, I think that's going to happen pretty soon. Yeah, I realized that I lost that circle edge and put that back. So now I'm knocking out the edges that I don't want anymore. And just going around, I'm going to slow this back down again. So I'm going around and just using the trim tool to knock out the extra supporting geometry that we don't need, and screwing up sometimes and hitting undo. But you can see that's a lot more powerful than having to get it absolutely correct the first time out. I mean, it's one of the things I really like about Fusion is that you have this ability to iterate on stuff. And you can usually attack most problems from multiple angles. It's whatever works best for you. So take out that geometry. Then I think I have to fix up the other side just by trimming out that geometry. And then I think we're just about done and ready to extrude those details. Yeah, it's like I may have to fix the outer ring again. Yeah, trim that out. Okay. So with all of those little segments defined, now I can go through and select them and do a push-pull and just raise those up to the upper, to the height of the outside ring, so to allow it to match up. There. Now the only thing left to do is the text in the middle. And admittedly, my experience with the text tool is kind of minimal, so I do a bit of flailing around here. So we'll just kind of speed up and move past this. But it's the same principle as anything else. You lay in the text, you set the size, and then you can use the push-pull tool to extrude it upwards. And whenever I have to stick text onto something, I typically will try to do it in Fusion. Just it's so much less tedious than trying to deal with like something like Modo, because Modo, as much as I love Modo, the text tool. Well, I really haven't explored the one in 10.1 that much. I think it's kind of improved, but typically modeling applications are not good with text. So after a certain amount of fooling around, I was able to get this to extrude correctly. And so I fooled around trying to get some kind of a taper or draft angle on the text, but whatever. It wasn't working out the way I wanted it to. So the only thing left to do at this point is to grab all of those hard edges and bevel them. Do chamfers and bevels, basically. And while that's typically very easy to do in something like Fusion, you do have to have a plan of attack, because like right here, I just grab everything and I try to give it a big fillet, and it's like, no, I try to give it a big fillet and it gives me a big finger. So typically the strategy that I go with is to grab, let me pause this for a second. You see up here, these areas here are really tight. So when they try to fill it out, they're going to end up with not much room. And if even one of your edges can't fill it correctly, it just aborts the fillet completely. So typically what you have to do is select these hard places and fillet those first. So you'll see here, as I go along, I'm doing a chamfer on the outer edge first, just because I want that established. But I'll usually go into those little corners and fillet those out first, because you'll see what that looks like here in a second. Right, so now they're rounded out and there's more space there, which gives me room to play with the fillet on the actual edge. And the letters are, I have to grab all the little vertical things first. Now this is not as bad as it looks, although I do wish that Fusion had a ring select that I could just say, do a ring select and make it easy on me, but I don't think it does. Or if it does, I'm stupid and don't realize it. So we're going to watch the letter E here. Just that got knocked out with nice fillets around all the edges, because I want that to show up on the normal map nicely. And these sharp edges, they just won't do that. So basically, let's speed this up because I have to go through the whole model now. and just select edges and fillet them and so on and so forth. So we'll do about a 4x here. Oh boy, that's really screwing up, isn't it? Let me back that down. But yeah, we just go through and do all the edges, and we'll just fast forward here to the final product, which I think is in the next video chunk. Hang on. Okay, so we're back, and all of the inner stuff has been filleted out correctly. Now I'm just finishing up that outer edge because it needed some smoothing, so it wasn't quite so sharp with its chamfers. So there it is, right? There's a high poly mesh that'll work. All the edges have been filleted, it's all smooth, and this should bake very cleanly. So in a second, we're going to take this over to Modo, and we will have a look at the next stage of prop production. Okay, so I've imported the, I exported the STL from Fusion. I typically use the medium setting. You can see we have like 44,000 triangles on this thing, and that seems like plenty to capture the roundness. You can do the high level one, but it seems to be, my experience is that it tends to be very heavy for no real benefit on most pieces. So just go with medium. So now there is a gap around the outside here from when I did my chamfering and beveling. So I'm just going to scale that interior up to fill it out, just to help the bake process out a little bit. And we've got these holes on the upper and lower side, so I'm just going to make a circle polygon and stick it in there just to give the raycaster something to hit when the normal map bakes out. So this is basically me trying to be considerate to the normal map process and giving it geo to hit and that kind of stuff. So there's the high poly. Now what I did right there is when you scale elements like this, like from STL files, and add new geo into the mesh and things like that, the smoothing can sometimes become a little janky. So by hitting this update smooth button down here on the Vertex toolkit, that allows it to update and fix all of that for me. And I'm going to turn on my matte cap shader here just to verify visually that I like the way it all looks. And I do. That all works for me. That looks like it'll be fine when it comes time to bake the normals. So I turn that off because I typically, I will apply a new material to the high poly and the low poly. So I tend to go with orange on the high poly. And when I make the low poly, I usually go with a blue just because they're complementary colors. And I can very easily tell what pieces belong to which mesh. So when they're intersecting and stuff, I can tell how much they're intersecting and so on and so forth. Now this mesh here, it's not that much of a concern because it's basically just a chamfered cylinder. But on more complex pieces, it does pay off. And you can see here that I've actually forgotten to move that low poly mesh to its own mesh item, which will help. So what I'm trying to do here is just trying to center them both on the world origin so they have a common pivot. So when the normal map baker runs, Substance Painter is very sensitive to the pivots of the meshes. If they're not identical, then you'll get weird skew details and the stuff won't be in the right place. So yeah, I've just learned to take that time and make sure that it's all lined up correctly. So here production continues on the low poly mesh, which I know is not a big deal in this case, but we're just going to have a cylinder with a single chamfer around the outside to kind of capture that roundness. And really that's it. But this does illustrate that there's no change to the silhouette. all that stuff in the middle, when you look at it from the side, all that stuff is at the same level. So since there's no change to the silhouette, there's no reason to wrap a low poly mesh around it because it doesn't matter. So just making the top flat is fine. Now something I will do, let me pause here, something I will do with my high poly meshes to prep them, this is just scar tissue from years of doing this, is I will go into my high poly meshes and make sure that no high poly mesh has UVs on it. And I'll check for random maps that may have been inserted, like some kind of vertex smooth or whatever. You know, I want one vertex normal map in there and no UVs. That's the that makes sure that my high poly map or mesh is clean. And in this case, for this low poly, we're just doing the UVs here, but it's really just a straight project, relax, and pack, and we're done, right? There's one chunk. So in this case, there's really nothing to be concerned about. And what am I doing here? Okay, now I'm going to check my FBX export preferences because I want to make sure this is set up correctly. And for Moto 10.1, this is what I found works well. They have a new option here to triangulate geometry, which is great, you know, because when it exports the FBX, I can work in quads in here, but as soon as it gets exported and is sent on the way to the baker or whatever, it's triangulated. So I know that it's consistently triangulated through the bake, through the export to Unreal and all that stuff. So that's wonderful. You know, smoothing groups and tangents and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that all looks good to me. Because truthfully, sometimes Moto will lose these settings for me and I have to come back and reapply my preset. I haven't figured out the logic behind that, but I assume there is some. All right. And one thing that I do typically do, like, okay, so let's say this was a normal prop, right? One that had sub D and edge weighting and all that kind of stuff. What I usually will do is make a duplicate of the high poly mesh and then freeze that mesh. Because in Moto, I can't export the FBX with edge weighting and things because it just won't show up. You know, that stuff doesn't export to the baker. So I'll duplicate the HP and freeze it. Now, in this case here, it's just an exercise for practice, just out of habit, I guess, is what I want to say. So anyway, we're going to export the high poly, the low poly, and the low poly cage, which is just the low poly kind of pushed out a little bit in this case. Nothing fancy, nothing worth looking at yet. And we'll take them over to Substance Painter and we'll look at the bake process. Okay, and here we are inside of Substance Painter. Now, it's worth noting here that what I typically do to speed up my bakes, see, I like to do subsampling, the 4x4 subsampling. But if you do that on position and thickness, you're going to be here all day long. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's so slow, but at the same time, it doesn't really seem to need it. So I'll typically do normal, world space normal, and curvature with this subsampling. And then I'll go back and do the AO position and thickness without it. That seems to be my magic sauce for getting the bake done, you know, in a reasonable amount of time. And one thing to point out here, some people, when they get started with normal maps, they have a misguided belief that the normal map is going to help them convey depth. And it really doesn't. What the normal map conveys is changes to the surface angles, right? So that's what the AO is really for. The ambient occlusion can help to convey depth because, you know, the deeper the hole or feature is, you know, the darker the AO will be. So the AO is really your friend when it comes to conveying depth. And the normal map is your friend when it comes to conveying changes to the surface curvature. Sorry, the surface curvature. Yeah, I've been talking too long now. You can see here that even though I have sped it up, it's still a slow process to bake out the thickness, but it's fine. You only do it once, so it doesn't really matter. We'll speed this up and just see if we can get this to happen a little quicker. 2 times. There we go. Okay. So that's just demonstrating. You see how we have no change to the silhouette of the mesh. So it's just got a flat top on it, yet it's conveying all that wonderful depth and curvature that we had set up in Fusion. So I'll throw a quick smart material on here just to demonstrate how the maps will interact and how quickly you can get something that looks decent when you're inside a Substance Painter. So there's a basic metal that I've thrown on top. And next up, I think I show you a little trick that I picked up from somewhere. Basically what you do to call out your edges and make it all look a little crisper is you create a new fill layer, like this, and turn off everything except for the color map. Take the curvature map that you had baked and drag that over to the base color and set the fill layer to overlay. And I'll put it down to about half strength, and you can see that kind of calls out the edges and just gives all the features just a little extra pop. And I really like the way that it looks. It's not strictly realistic, but as far as I'm concerned, it's game art. So whatever looks good, that's what you should do. Whatever looks good and whatever meshes well with the art style of the game you're dealing with, do that. So basically this takes us to the end. Exporting this to Unreal Engine 4 or Unity is a pretty straightforward process. And I just throw a different material on here to demonstrate. You can see more obviously where the AO is falling into the crevices and things. You can really see it here. This is the baseline level here. And the divots on the outside were deeper, and so the AO really shows up there. So yeah, the AO map can help convey depth, and the normal map helps you convey your surface changes and deviations. So really that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and in the future we'll do something more complicated, but I wanted to get this playlist started, and this seemed like a good place to start. So see you next time.